Hello everyone, it's Pete. Today's video is going to be quite a big one. I'm going to be going over my new player experience in 2020 playing Final Fantasy XIV. I've had a few people ask me what I've thought of the game since picking it up a couple months back, how I found it, how it stacks up compared to some other MMOs, and what the general player experience is like. Perhaps this is your first time diving into an MMO, perhaps you're a seasoned veteran looking for something new. Hopefully I can provide a little bit of insight and help guide your opinions on whether or not you want to try out this game. So my past experience, I've played a lot of World of Warcraft back in the day, dabbled in a bit of RuneScape, played a bit of Blade and Soul, and most recently I decided to mix it up a little bit and play some Destiny 2. But I've never quite found the game experience that really hit home for an MMO that I've really been looking for. However, recently I've picked up Final Fantasy XIV, and I've got to say, a lot of what the game has to offer has hit the mark for me. So as I said, I'd like to share that with you, give you some of my opinions, and especially with the changes to the free-to-play experience coming on August the 11th with patch 5.3, hopefully this will inform your decision of whether or not you want to try out the free trial, or even invest into the full game and see everything it has to offer. Now, I'm going to break this video down into several parts. We're going to talk about character creation, the leveling experience, the story itself, endgame content, and just the depth and breadth of the world and all the little side activities that the game has to offer. There is a great wealth of different choices that you can make in the game to enjoy the game in your own way and have your own personal experience. And I'm going to do my best to outline those and give some general impressions on them from what I've experienced so far. So I'm going to start this off with what you will be greeted with when you first open up the game, which is the character creation and the choice of server/world that you want to play on. The game is broken down into several data centers based around the world, so ideally you're going to want to pick one where you know you have friends who'll be playing, you can coordinate with them, or if you're looking for one more locally, something that's going to give you good connection and good ping. This game is rather forgiving when it comes to ping with the nature of how stuff works, but obviously less ping is always better. Once you've decided on that, you're going to be looking at creating your character. Now, the first thing you're greeted with is a selection of in-game races to choose from. Most of these choices are purely cosmetic. Some will be locked behind expansions, such as the Viera, Hrothgar, or Aura, but you do have plenty to choose from to start with, whether you want to be a tall and mighty Ro, an adorably demonic little Lalafell, a regular human being, or even go full Catboy. The choices are endless. Once you've then chosen on that, you have the starting stats. These are a little bit of a trap. They don't really do too much to actually affect your character, so don't worry too much about them. It can seem like it will be impactful, but in the end, they will be essentially meaningless. Once you've then made these decisions, you're then looking at the full customization for appearance. You've got height, hairstyles, face shapes, tattoos, facial features. You can give your character mutton chops if you are so desiring to. There are a lot of choices to really make your character yours and make it unique. So feel free to dive into this. I know I spent perhaps too much time working on this, but it was an awful lot of fun to really personalize my character to look the way I wanted them to. After this, you're going to start to pick the job your character will be starting with. Now, an important feature with Final Fantasy XIV is that the job you select on your character is not locked to that one job per character. Unlike other MMOs where you might pick your character and your class, and you're locked with them, in 14, when you create your character and you're playing on them, you have the option to switch between classes/jobs at any point during your playtime. If you start on a mage and you're enjoying casting spells, but you think, maybe I want to try out a bit of melee combat, I want to grab a sword and be a samurai, I want to tank a boss with a sword and shield as a paladin, these options are available on the same character. So there is that freedom to try something out, find out you don't like it, and switch without losing that progress on that character, or clogging your character list with a bunch of characters you maybe play now and again. There are some jobs which will be limited to later levels. For example, there's Dark Knight at level 30 with the Heavensward expansion, Red Mage at 50 in Stormblood, and Gunbreaker at 60 in Shadowbringers. These ones you will have to level another job to this level and get to a certain point in the game to unlock, but they do start at a higher level to accommodate that fact. Now, once you've decided on your class and the design of your character you like, you don't have to worry too much if you want to change your hairstyle or some of the more cosmetic things, you can do so in-game for in-game currency. However, any full character appearance changes or race changes will require a transaction from the Mog Station, which is Final Fantasy XIV's online shop. Now, the last little detail, once all this is ready to go, the server you are picking, there is a preferred server status. I can highly recommend this. If you are to roll a character on a preferred status server, there is the Road to 70 buff you will receive in-game. This will double the XP you're earning on characters' classes below level 70. This is a fantastic feature to help new players catch up and get up to endgame content, as well as skip through a lot of the side quest grind that can be present in MMOs. You will be able to just grind on with the story and get yourself to endgame as quickly as you desire without feeling like you're going to be hitting a lot of roadblocks. This buff will last for 90 days or until the server loses preferred status, which means if those 90 days run out and the server is still preferred, you've still got the buff to keep leveling alts, or if you've just been taking your time, it will give you plenty of opportunity to work at your own pace, so you're not playing against the clock with it. Now all that is done, you and your character are ready to welcome yourself to the world of Eorzea, the home of Final Fantasy XIV. Eorzea is a vibrant, diverse world with a lot of different regions, different biomes, different aesthetics, and different peoples to meet. From sunny beaches in Lanosia, arid deserts in Thanalan, snowy peaks in Kurthus, and a variety of other unique, amazing regions to reach, there is an awful lot to get stuck into, and a very vast world to just get lost in. Get out there, get exploring, and see what it has to offer. I will say for myself, the depth of the world is definitely something that grabbed my attention. The story does a very good job of traveling you through each zone, experiencing the zones, getting a feel for the atmosphere of them. The tone of them especially is fantastically set out. And you'll go from starting with your everyday menial tasks to building yourself into being the mighty warrior of light. And the context of those zones does an awful lot to add to that experience. Even in small side quests and off the beaten track, I've got to say I found characters, stories, and settings that were well fleshed out. It didn't feel railroaded, which is important. Despite the good progression through the game, there was never really any points where I felt railroaded and like I was missing out. I was able to go off the beaten track, find all these little side quests, and find really compelling, interesting characters while I was there with them. As an add-on as well, I must say in my experience, even from the early levels all the way through to the end, I didn't find a lot of situations where I felt like I was the only player in a zone. There would often be people traveling around, you'd run into other players, you could find people doing similar quests to you, help each other out, and it truly felt like a living world, which I think is a big feature for an MMO. I know with some games I've played, the open world kinda just feels like a destination A to B kind of place to get to the next activity. In 14 at least, I must say I've been very impressed with how real the world feels and how well populated and active it is with all the players around. Now we'll segue from this into talking about the story. I know for many of you, you'll be in one camp or another when it comes to really enjoying the story of games, or just wanting to skip through it all, get to the end game content, and start grinding for gear or more challenging activities to do. Fortunately for you, both of these are completely viable options within this game. I do have to say though, for myself, someone who has never really found myself that invested in MMO game storylines, I've usually found them to not be the kind of game I'd play for story. Instead, I'd go for something much more story-focused. Final Fantasy XIV's story did very much stand out to me in the context of an MMO. There's not a lot of loose threads, unfinished stories. Everything has a nice progression. I felt invested in the characters and the consequences. And of course, very importantly, there are good, compelling villains you're facing against. Because every hero story needs to have a compelling villain that you are working against and balances out against you quite well. I will be honest, I fully came into this game expecting to skip through a lot of the story and blast my way to endgame as quickly as possible. There was a slow start, and it did grind a little bit, but it very quickly starts to pick up towards the middle of Realm Reborn, and by the time you find yourself in Heavensward onwards, at least for me, I was very much invested, watching all the cutscenes and really trying to soak in every bit of the world and the characters and the story that I could. I'll try to keep things as spoiler light as possible, but I'll give you a quick overview of what you're going to roughly see in Realm Reborn and Heavensward as a story, and then we'll leave Stormblood and Shadowbringers for you guys to discover for yourselves if you decide to fully dive into the game and commit to it. So, if you've heard of Final Fantasy XIV's original release, you might have heard of what was called 1.0. Frankly, Square Enix pushed out what many consider to be quite a disappointing game. They recognized this, and in one of the biggest moves they've ever done, they decided to drop a moon onto the planet, wipe everything out, and start fresh. This is where Realm Reborn, your base game for Final Fantasy XIV Online nowadays, comes in. This game will serve to introduce you to the world, the threat of the primals, your role as the Warrior of Light, and the dangers the people of Eorzea face. As I've said before, I found the start of this quite slow. It's the usual MMO kind of fetch quest, kill some bugs, save the pigs, defend the farm kind of thing. It does drag a little bit. Once you've gotten through that early setup, you've traveled to the 3 major starting zones and got a feel for what's going on though, the game does establish where the story is going for you in the context of Realm Reborn. And I definitely found the end of it very interesting. Fighting against the Imperial Legions and trying to take down the big bad of the base story. Especially the ending, for me, really delivered a circumstance and a situation where I was excited to see what was coming next. There are still some points that will drag, and there's a lot of walking around, looking at you waking sands. But the good news on this front is with the patch 5.3 changes, they are cutting down a lot of the bloat and the parts of the base story that will drag. So while these were concerns for myself, and maybe something you will hear from other people in previous experiences of leveling and being new to the game, if you are coming into it new this month and from now onwards, you will hopefully have a much more pleasant experience in that regard. Once you've wrapped up your Realm Reborn adventures, you're going to find yourselves headed off to Heavensward. Now in my opinion, this is really where the story takes off. You are sent off to the city of Ishgard in the north of Eorzea. It's a tale with dragons, with noble knights, with magic, and with high stakes and socio-political consequences that ran a lot deeper than I was really expecting. I found this part of the game to really grab me, and this was the point I knew, from a story standpoint, me, Mr. Cutscene Skipper, wanted to get very invested and wanted to know what was going to happen to these characters I was starting to care about, and this world that had me suddenly so invested. I can definitely say, if you're on the fence, give the story a shot. Now, as you're working your way through this story, you'll obviously be leveling up. The good news is, for your first class on your character, the story itself will serve as the main method for which you'll level. Just by going through the main story quests, doing the dungeons that come along during the main story, working through some of the boss fights, you'll find yourself with the Road to 70 buff more than able to keep up with levels and even perhaps over-leveled at times for the story you're working through. Don't worry about over-leveling too much. For the 70 to 80 content at the end, if you're going to get there, you are probably going to be grateful you've got a couple of extra levels in your back pocket, because that will slow down a little bit. However, once you've got that main character to the end of the story and all leveled up to max, you may want to be leveling alternative classes. This is going to come back to what I was talking about earlier, where you don't need to make a new character to level a different class or job. Instead, you can go to the guild belonging to that job throughout the world, pick up the quests, and start leveling that class. Now, this is a double-edged sword, because you will not be able to just repeat the story to level up your new character. Instead, what you're going to be doing is a bunch of other activities that are available through the game to get levels on your character. Personally, I found this to be quite a good system, because I didn't find the story got stale through repetition of wanting to level more and more classes. There's a lot of very fun jobs in this game, with a lot of very unique and varied ways to play, and I think for someone like myself who wants to level a lot of those, I may have found myself burnt out, or found my opinion of the story diminished due to having to repeat it over and over again. So I was very grateful for the way this system works. The main thing you'll be looking at for leveling alts is the daily roulette system. This is a bunch of daily activities, dungeons, raids, boss fights, the dreaded MSQ roulette where you repeat the final mission of Realm Reborn with unskippable cutscenes. It takes a while. Cook yourself some dinner while it's going on, put your feet up, watch your show. Just make sure you're there to kill the bosses. Don't be the guy who goes AFK. But if you are to do all of these will net you a significant chunk of experience for the time you invest into them, and will help you level along the way. Now, if you've got some more time beyond that, and you want to keep the grind going, This game does offer the good old dungeon grinding system, where you can just queue up for some dungeons, get in, run them, the XP they give is reasonable, and you can just dungeon grind away. There's also options such as the tribe quests, which are daily repeatable quests, available at 50, 60, and 70, and in those like brackets for those 10 levels. Those will also get you a bit of XP and reputation with those groups for your time. They also have their own little unique storylines and help develop the world and the story around them as you do them. It's a nice little side activity that I personally found really enjoyable, and I was a big fan of the fact that the reputation grind in this game is limited purely to them, and it's not even really a grind, because there's no major content that gets locked behind reputation gates, something that has significantly put me off other MMOs in the past. Instead, you just go in, do your 3 little quests with them a day, and as you level them up, there are cosmetic rewards and mounts that you can earn by having those maxed out. Beyond that, you've also got hunting logs and fates. At early levels, hunting logs are a fantastic way to go hunt some enemies in the world, explore to all the little corners, find these unique enemies hidden away, get yourself a little bit of XP for them. Later on, you'll get hunting boards for specific hunts, which you'll find in the major expansion cities, which will send you out on slightly more challenging monster hunts, and you'll be rewarded with more XP again for that. Beyond that, there's also the Final Fantasy XIV's own spin on the deep dungeon system, with Palace of the Dead and Heaven on High. This is another great way to earn a little bit of XP on leveling alt classes, as well as progress through the classic deep dungeon system, where you go floor to floor to floor, facing more challenging enemies with interesting modifiers, and unique ways to approach the rooms, the bosses, and the fights. I've spent a lot of time in these, because I personally quite enjoy the deep dungeons, and I've got to say, I do very much enjoy 14's spin on it, and it's a nice little way, if you've got that extra time, to keep leveling up. These are all great alternatives, and as well, if you find yourself being a DPS main, and you want to dodge those long dungeon queues, the deep dungeons are your friend, as are doing your hunting logs and fates. If you're queuing for regular dungeons, you can fill that longer queue time by going out into the world and doing them. Fates, of course, are the public event style things in 14. They are just in the open world. You'll clear a certain amount of ads, collect a certain amount of things, kill a boss. Most of these fates are soloable, some will require a larger group, but they're a nice little way to fill the time. Now that you're all done with leveling though, you've got your job to 80, and you know you want to get into endgame, let's talk about that. So, you find yourself at max level. You're wondering what to do, there's an awful lot that's presented in front of you, and you got to figure out what to do. Now the good news is there is a great variety. It may seem daunting, but depending on your tastes, there is something for everyone. There are dungeons at endgame, trials, and raids. Dungeons obviously are pretty self-explanatory. Trials are like mini raid bosses, which I personally found to be a really good stepping stone between different difficulty tiers of raids. And speaking of which, there is a very deep and interesting raiding system in 14 too. You've got your standard alliance raids, which are 24-man large activities, where your party and 2 others are paired or grouped up. And it's kind of 14's own little slice of LFR, if you're familiar with that from WoW. You go in, the mechanics are usually simpler, the bosses are high HP, and it's a nice little way to get some loot, get into a feel of what raiding content will be like, and dip your toes. If this is something that appeals to you, we've then got normal raids, which scale you down to only 8 players in your party. This means there's going to be more pressure on personal responsibility and mechanics, but due to the game's scaling difficulty system, it will feel like a natural progression if you want to take yourself to that next step. These normal raids will be single boss fights. Some of the earlier ones have ad pools between, but they've gone down to a system of just the boss fights themselves, and you get to see yourself fight some truly iconic enemies from the world of Final Fantasy XIV and the rest of the Final Fantasy universe beyond. If you've got yourself dipped into this normal tier of content and you want to take it to the next level, Final Fantasy XIV's difficulty system then presents you with extreme trials, and finally Savage and Ultimate raiding tiers. These are a way to really take the step up and raise the challenge for yourself. I personally have to say the scaling difficulty system in this game's content was a huge draw for me. For someone like myself who loves raiding content, I think it's fantastic that I can put my feet up, do an alliance raid or a normal raid, take it a little bit easy, and still get that fill of the content I enjoy, while at the same time, when I really want to challenge myself and push myself, I can then start to queue for things like Savage content. I hopefully will be working towards Ultimate soon. And those kind of really high intensity, unforgiving, challenging pieces of content are also there available to me. This, again, I can't stress enough, I think is a great way to do your endgame content. It means that it's accessible for people at the lower end who maybe have less time commitment or less desire to push themselves. While if you are someone who really wants to grind and really, really wants to put yourself up against the toughest odds, that is also available to you too. On top of that, the game as well has a fantastic, in my opinion, raid loot system. It struck a very good balance for me between the RNG drop nature of searching for that piece you really need, but also with a little bit of guaranteed safety net progression. For anything that's not current content, it's endlessly farmable. If you want to go in, get gear to level up to the final tier of content, you can just grind away and get all that. If you want stuff for glamour, because some of the raid armor honestly looks amazing, you can also go farm the even older ones to pick them up. But on current content, you will be limited to 1 drop a week from endgame Savage raid bosses. However, the nice thing with this is that you will also be rewarded with a token upon clearing it, and after 4, 6, or 8 weeks, if you have had really bad luck and not found that piece you need, you can buy it for yourself from a vendor. If raiding's not your thing though, don't worry. If you still want to have good gear and notice combat improvements and damage improvements on your class, there is other very powerful high item level gear available to you by running the expert dungeons and other level 80 content. It will never be as good as the truly pinnacle gear from the end activities, but there is still a very good way to level up your character and see some progression. Beyond that, if you're looking for a more relaxed environment, I have to say a diamond in the rough for myself was the treasure hunt system. If you have a crafter or gatherer leveled, you can go out, find some treasure maps, or just buy them off the marketplace, and you and your friends can go out and search for these treasure chests in the world by deciphering the maps, and when you open them there's a chance you'll get transported into a treasure dungeon where you and some friends have to gamble, battle, and make bad choices for the pathways to reach the end and hopefully achieve a big payout. Speaking of crafters and gatherers, if combat's not your thing, I must say I was incredibly impressed by the crafting and gathering system in this game, and I'm a little bit hooked on it. It's actually incredibly useful, it's a good way to make money in the game, and it's just a very fun system for producing things with professions. The rotations are interesting, you have to put a lot of thought into how you want to design it, and there's a lot of gear optimization to it. I could talk for a long time about just whittling away crafting things in this game. It's very relaxing, it's a lovely way to fill the time, and I dread to think how many hours I probably spent doing so. But if that's your kind of jam, if that's what you're interested in, I can definitely highly recommend trying out the crafting and gathering in this game. It's one of the best ones I've seen so far, and it adds a nice bit of padding out to what you can do in the game beyond just hitting things and pressing buttons. On the cosmetic side of things, at endgame, you can get player housing. Again, a thing a lot of people ask for in MMOs, they want to have player housing. 14 does this fairly well. I will admit there are some issues with the availability of houses and the ability to get them. I think there's definitely some refinement to the system about how bids are placed on houses and how available it is to players. It's currently locked out due to the COVID situation where the auto-demolish is not working. They switched that off to allow for people who won't be subbed during these times to be able to keep their houses. So if you find yourself trying to get one like me, you may find the supply is pretty short right now. But that should hopefully open up a little bit soon as that restriction lifts and as the new housing area currently being constructed through a large community effort is completed, opening up a bunch of new plots for people on your server to buy. Beyond that, if passion for fashion is your true endgame, the options in 14 are nigh on limitless. Almost every piece of gear can be glamoured or dyed, meaning you can truly create a unique style for your character where they look exactly how you want them to look. You can find the pieces, change them around, change their appearance, make your character look exactly the way you want. I always see a lot of very unique, very interestingly glamoured characters around the game, and it's always cool to see people express that creative side of themselves. If that's something that you're interested in, you'll definitely have a very good time with that. And that kind of wraps up a lot of the stuff you can do at endgame. As I've said, the thing that really appealed to me was just the ability, whether you're a casual player or the hardest of hardcore, you'll find that there is something here for you. There's very little required time commitment to do something meaningful and enjoyable in the game. But if you have that extra time and you really, really want to dive into it, sink your teeth into the game, and grind on content for hours, you'll definitely find it possible to do so in the world of Final Fantasy XIV. So the last little detail I want to talk about is the community. In an MMO, it's a massive multiplayer online game, and for me, community is a big part of it. Now, it's an online game, it's never going to be perfect. You'll always find some bad apples here and there, but I must say, from my personal experience, the community and my impressions of it in Final Fantasy XIV have been fantastic. There's a lot of in-game systems in place, such as the mentor system, which is designed to help experienced players help and teach new players. And for the most part, everyone I've met, especially during my journey as a newer player, was incredibly helpful in helping me find out what's going on in the world, figure out what I want to do, and help guide me on my journey forward. If community is a big thing for you, I hope that this game will have the same effect on you as it had on me, and you'll be able to find a welcoming, friendly group of people to share your time in game with. Worry not, this game is also not community dependent. If you're a lone wolf player, if you like to go it alone, there is plenty of party finder systems, duty finders, and ways to get into content as a solo player without having to commit to being part of a team or part of a clan, or as they're referred to in this game, a free company. You can just go it alone, and you will have an incredibly enjoyable experience doing so, and you will not be missing out on content by not being part of a community within the game. And that about wraps it up for what we've got to talk about in the video. That's my impressions, that's how I found the game so far with my experience in the few months I've been playing it since picking it up earlier this year. If anything I've talked about has interested you, maybe piqued your attention, as I said, with patch 5.3 on the 11th of August, which is in a week's time now, there is going to be some major changes to the free-to-play system. They are now making all the content up until level 60 and the end of the Heavensward expansion available for free, including the classes that come with that, so there's plenty more to dive into. I can highly recommend, if you're thinking of trying out this game and seeing what it's got to offer, this will be the time to do so. You can find information on how to sign up for the free trial down in the description below, or visit the Final Fantasy XIV website. And if you do decide to try out the game, I do really hope you enjoy it, and let me know how you found your experiences. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I know it's been a long one today, but I really wanted to get all these thoughts out and into a video because I've had a lot of people asking me recently how I've been finding it, and I wanted to sort of try and condense that into some kind of organized format. This is me though, so it's about as disorganized as organized can get. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day. If you want to check us out playing the game, I'm live on Twitch during the week. You can find the link down below, as well as regular content coming out on the YouTube from everything we do in the